I'm Joe Ciccarelli, producer, engineer, mixer. I live and work in Los Angeles and all over the globe. You know, the thing about Summit gear is it has the vintage flavor, it has the three-dimensionality and warmth of tubes, but yet there's a cleanliness and an openness to the top end. You can drive it a little harder than a lot of old pieces of gear. Obviously, a lot of the older gear was not meant to deal with the levels that we work at now in digital and all, so the Summit has more headroom, but yet delivers something that feels retro. And as you can see, we're here at Sunset Sound in Hollywood, which is a just classical studio that's been around from probably the 50s or 60s, and custom made all Class A consoles. And for most rock and roll, I'm a fan of vintage gear because you want things that give you a lot of color, a lot of personality. And so I tend to work at studios that are composed of this kind of gear, and I find that Summit augments that really, really well. I'm always grabbing Summit EQs and limiters for bass and vocals and piano and just so many things. Drum bus, I've used the 200 on drum bus compression many, many times. Well, my signal paths and even my choice of gear really changes from sound to sound, from project to project, artist to artist, because each album you're looking to give a little bit different color, a little bit different personality. So it really does change from album to album. But most often, with lead vocals especially, I'm looking for something that delivers a great sense of size, that I really feel a lot of presence and personality from the vocal, that it's big and it commands the track. So I like to have gear that really has a sense of depth and bigness to the low end. So my typical signal path for a lead vocal might be something like a Class A or even a tube mic preamp, depending, and then a tube EQ, and maybe even a tube compressor. And I'm very particular about compressors and compressor settings with vocals, and I'll often, when I'm recording an artist for the first time, I might try 3 or 4 different preamps, but I'll probably try 5 or 6 different compressors by the time I'm done, because sometimes I find like the rock songs need a tighter, tougher kind of compression, and the ballads or the more intimate ones want a very gentle kind of compression, and so I really kind of tailor things. But if I'm going to do any EQ to a lead vocal, I want it to be somewhat gradual, gentle kind of slopes, something that doesn't change the character of the microphone or the preamp too much, that really just is a loudness curve in a lot of ways. So with lead vocals, I'll tend to use an EQ that's got a very gentle, broad kind of curve. So I might use a Summit 200 EQ, because it's basically a loudness curve that I'm after. I just want the vocal to take up room in the track and have an openness to the top end and a size to the low end. So depending on what I'm after, if I want the vocal to be a little bit more aggressive, I might put the EQ in front of the compressor. If I want it to be a little bit more open and hi-fi and have the compressor not react to those frequencies that I'm boosting or cutting, then I'll put the EQ after the compressor. The one thing I did when I first started, I started as a bass player in a lot of bands and did demos with my bands when I was a kid, and was very intrigued with the process. And I just was a sponge. I soaked up everything. I watched everybody. I know I was a nuisance to any engineer that I ever came in contact with, or producer or other musician. And I think that's really important, that you learn a little of everything, and that is a little of music, and that's all kinds of music. I think classical to bluegrass to whatever, depending. If you're doing hip hop, you know what? Learn something about classical music, because I guarantee you one day it'll help you out. And if you're really just a engineering type that's a kind of, should we say, a tweakhead, then learn something about circuits and basic circuit design, and learn something about how guitars are made, and the mindset behind designing a guitar amplifier, and how distortion works, and learn about people, learn about psychology, learn about people skills. And I just think that this is a job that's very people oriented, and artists are very fragile people, and the more you can understand them and understand their history and their upbringing and their likes, and have common ground and have a rapport with them, the better off you are. So I tend to think that the more well-rounded you are as a person, perhaps the better you can be as an engineer or producer or musician. And so I think anybody coming up in the business, the best thing you can do is just learn from everybody you come in contact with. One thing I did when I was really young, coming up, and was interested in engineering, was I started to listen to recorded music and listen to all types of it. But I also was fascinated by going out and hearing live jazz and live classical music and bluegrass music, because I just thought that when I listened to a banjo on a record, no matter how well recorded it was, in my mind it didn't really sound like what a banjo sounded like in life. And obviously electronics translate things very differently. So I thought the more I understood the way instruments sounded in their natural environment, the better off I would be at recording them. Even if I chose in a particular instance to not record them in a natural light, but to have the knowledge of what they were supposed to sound like really, really helped me out. So I used to go to the Boston Symphony all the time, where I grew up, and it was fantastic to hear an orchestra and a great concert hall. So I think hearing bands and artists and opera singers and everybody in a live environment is something that's crucial for somebody coming up. I will say that one thing that I learned over the years is that there are no rules, and I was fortunate when I first started out as a young engineer to work with Frank Zappa, and his motto was to break all the rules. And I think when you sort of go at something with very little preconceived notions, I think you're open to magical things that can happen. So I think, once again, it's learning about everything and having this encyclopedic knowledge about music and sound is fantastic to have in the back of your head and rely on. But I think being able to act spontaneously in a situation and kind of size things up and realize, oh, okay, well, this sound needs to be bigger or smaller or brighter, or more hi-fi or more lo-fi, or less important in the track than I thought it was going to be. So I think being able to really kind of act in the moment, if you will, is really important.